So I'm here with Nicholas Gregoriades, and he's a badass. He got his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in 4 years from Roger Gracie, who, for those of you who don't know, is probably one of the greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts ever. He also is a co-founder of London Real. He's a mentor, does life coaching, and he also has his own podcast, Liberation Mentor. And today he's here with me to talk about spirituality and a little bit about his life and background. And as you know, this is maybe my third. I mean, I've done a number of interviews, but this is going to maybe be the third different person because we did some repeat interviews for Humble Stature. And Humble Stature is basically, I'm trying to create an alternative Buddhist community here in LA. And even though I don't know if you identify as Buddhist, but definitely just finding spiritually minded people and brothers and warriors and connecting is what it's all about. So thank you for being here, brother.
Thanks for having me, Manu.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. So I guess we might just start off a little bit with your beginning. How does someone get, in a position, I guess even from your childhood, to become a black belt in 4 years with Hodger and all that?
Yeah, man. So that story, the reason I was able to get my black belt so quickly, it was 4.5 years actually. I did judo when I was a little kid, and so I had a instinctive understanding of how grappling kind of worked, and also I was just very focused, and everything came together at the right time. It's when my body was, in your early 20s, you can train hard, you can train 3 times a day if you have to, and I think for me, I was just very, very lucky, and I worked hard and I was focused, and all those things came together, and that allowed me. And also I had instruction from one of the best guys in the world, and it just came together.
When I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I started when I was 16. I wanted to be like a pro fighter, and man, I was so unathletic. I was a fat, pudgy goth kid who could barely. I didn't even get on the basketball team, even though Marty's 6'7", because I ended up gouging someone in the eye in the tryouts. It was just a disaster,
Yeah.
So you got your black belt, and then you started teaching and mentoring, and then you also got in the whole London Real thing, where you're a co-founder of that. How did that transition from there, where you started getting into maybe broadening your, scope?
So London Real was started. It was me and a friend of mine and I. We were having these we would take these walks in London and we'd have these philosophical chats, and we were fans of the Joe Rogan podcast at the time. And then I think one day one of us, I can't remember who, one of us said, hey, we should do something like the Joe Rogan podcast, right? Or the Joe Rogan experience. And, I always like to be someone, I hate being someone who just talks big and then doesn't act. It's one of my things I promised myself I never want to be in life. So we said, yeah, and we're going to do it. We did it. And it just started getting more and more popular, and just a lot of fun. It was just a fun experiment for me, and now it's grown into something very different from what I originally envisioned. But I was happy to be a part of it, and I learned a lot doing that project.
Right on, man. And so after you got into London Real, and then from there, how did that transition into mentoring and all this stuff and our life coaching?
Yeah, so after that, I went on a trip. When I left London Real, I'd been living in London. I left London. I packed up most of my stuff, sold or gave away a lot of it. Just had three suitcases, and I was like, I had an online business at the time that was generating decent money, and I was like, fuck it, I don't need to be here. I left London and I just started traveling, and my intention there was to just have fun, learn. I was doing a lot of yoga at the time, and I just started hanging out with these really cool people. I've stopped here in America for a summer, and I'd come here and I taught a seminar here at this location. I actually met people like Brent from
Whose place this is?
Yeah, from Subconscious Jiu-Jitsu, and then I'd meet just these cool, interesting people, and I was always learning from them. That's the one thing I was always learning. I was like, that's one of my, we all as human beings, we all have flaws, but we also all have superpowers, and that's one of my superpowers is I'm always watching, I'm always learning, I'm always wanting to expand. And so fortunately I got to be around these great people, and they really taught me a lot, and I learned a lot as well on my own escapades. And then I got to a point where I was like, teaching jiu-jitsu is good, but I want to do something in addition to that. I want to start teaching, because I'm not just a student of jiu-jitsu, I'm a student of life. You know, I'm trying to get really good at life. So I wanted to start teaching and sharing the stuff that I'd learned. And yeah, that's how that came about. I thought, okay, the next step is going from being a jiu-jitsu teacher to being a life teacher. Realizing that's harder said than done, because just like jiu-jitsu, life is infinite, right? And just when you think you got it figured out, it kicks the shit out of you, right?
Yeah,
just like jiu-jitsu. So
Sure.
it's been an interesting, ongoing experience. It's been very challenging, very fun.
Did you go through like a training program with the coaching stuff, or was this kind of like your life experience? You're like, oh, I can communicate all this stuff about business and all the stuff that I went
Sure.
through, or was there actually like even a training?
I went through. It was a combination of both. I did a training program for 6 months, and it's also just. I think the thing with training programs is it comes a point where you've got to become the authority, and if you're always doing training programs with other people, and like that's setting a signal out, like, okay, I'm not the authority. You know what I mean? So I did this one course, and I learned a hell of a lot. But then thought to myself, okay, if I want to give people original, powerful ideas, I can't just keep regurgitating stuff that I've learned somewhere else. It's not. It's going to be pretty mechanical if I just go do a course and then spit it back out. It's the same with jiu-jitsu. There comes a point where, like, I have some students who they're always asking me, okay, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I get to a point sometimes where I say to them, man, now's the time for you to figure it out. You know, like, you don't want to just copy me. You know, like, if you look at any good teacher, half of what he knows, any good jiu-jitsu teacher especially, half of what he knows comes from what he was taught before, and the other half comes from stuff he made up himself or he discovered himself.
Yeah.
So learning to walk that was an interesting part of what I do with the coaching.
Absolutely. And then that ended up going into the podcast then, I'm assuming, kind of started when you started doing the coaching as well then? That was like the next thing?
Yeah, the podcast, I've had a podcast. When I left London Real, I started another podcast called The Journey. And then that morphed into another one called Digital Communion that I was doing with my friend Thomas. And then it morphed into the Jiu-Jitsu Brotherhood podcast. So through the last 10 years, the one thread has been I've always been doing a podcast, right? And Liberation Mentor is just the latest iteration of that.
Right on.
Yeah.
And then from there, you've gone also, I probably should mention also author. So your book, Aligned, here we have. And now that we kind of went through your life a little bit, I'm kind of excited to get in maybe in the different topics and just talk philosophy a bit. I mean, the first one that kind of really stood out to me is meditate every day. That's kind of your, number 3 in the book. And so what was your experience? If you could tell me a little bit of your experience with meditation.
Yeah, man. So that's a great question. There was a point 10 years ago, I think it was, 10 or 11 years ago, where I had a very difficult experience in my life. And my mind was just torturing me, man. Like every day I'd wake up, and my mind would just start fucking torturing me with this one thing, just torturing me, like it would not leave me alone. And I realized, man, this thing in my head that I always thought was my ally, it's like, it's not my ally anymore. It's out of control. And I'd been reading a book by Osho at the time, and Osho was talking about meditation, and I just thought to myself, well, let me give it a try. And so I meditated for a few days, and there came a point where my mind went quiet and I got a little bit of peace, and I was like, okay, there's something to this. So since then I've tried to make my meditation practice consistent. I don't always get it right because sometimes life is just so chaotic. Like when I moved to LA, I wasn't able really to meditate because I didn't have my little spot, like my little routines, and like everything was up and down. But
it's so hard to build a new routine. It takes so much energy.
Yeah, right. But once you have it, it's worth it. Yeah.
And so I know with Osho, they do a lot of more active meditation where they're kind of like yelling or screaming or something like that. And then you sit down because you like let out the energies, kind of my understanding of his system, even though that kind of came, from my understanding, when he came to the West, he saw all these people with anxiety and just like pent up. And so like, let it all out and then we'll sit.
Sure.
So what type of meditation do you do then? Is it you're screaming and yelling and then you're sitting, or how do you like to work it?
What I think is most important for me at this point is just no mind meditation. So just trying to watch the thoughts and not engage with any of them until you come to a place of stillness. But you know what is actually my main form of meditation lately is lifting weights. It's strange, like that's the thing I go into the gym, spend 45 minutes there, and that's my like moving meditation. It's not the same as the meditation practice I'm talking about in the book, but it's been the most effective one as of late. But I think seated like no mind meditation is probably one that most people need, especially in the modern world, right?
So when you say like no mind meditation, does that mean you're kind of just observing the mind? So it'd be like mindfulness based. It sounds like, I don't know if there's a distinction between no mind versus mindfulness, where you just be observing and being the experiencer, seeing what happens.
So I'm trying to get to the point where the monkey mind quietens down or just stops, and there's maybe no mind isn't the correct term, but just getting to that point where the chattering stops and you feel more connected and expansive, and your consciousness just spreads out. That's what I'm trying to do. Don't get there often, but trying.
Right on. Yeah, for me, like the thing with meditation is, at least in the West, a lot of it that I think the part that's missing is usually it's about detachment for me. So like there's a lot of things that I feel like can quiet the mind that are relaxing or peaceful, or there's less stress or whatever. But like the key factor that kind of differentiates one, well, I always consider it like to be a practice. It has to be done consciously. So even though like even say with ayahuasca or other things, even though I think it's beneficial spiritually, I wouldn't call it a meditation, because of the fact that it's really your own awareness instead of something happening to you. Like if I just went into the ocean, maybe I have this experience, maybe I can relax, but I wouldn't really count as a meditation of my own definition. And then the third factor would really be that observing thing. So you can even be chanting, you could be doing mantras, as long as you're, it's a practice, it's conscious, and you're being mindful, where you're just observing, not reacting, to create that detachment. That's how I define my meditation. So does that kind of resonate with you? Or
Yeah, that's interesting. I once was telling a friend about meditation. I was saying to him, bro, you got to start meditation. It's going to help you so much. And he said to me, he tries to meditate, or what did he say exactly? He said, I'm trying to meditate all the time. Just as I'm awake, moving through life, I'm trying to be conscious. And I think there's something to that. I think, like for example, today I was driving on the freeway, and I was in my own head about something, and I was just angry and thinking about this one thing, and it was just looping over and over. And then I said, center yourself, just use this as a form of meditation. You're driving, pay attention to everything, be fully conscious, be fully present, be fully aware. And I think sitting at the top of a mountain in lotus position, with the eyes closed and emptying the mind is cool. And I recommend everyone adopt the practice where you do that, right? But ultimately, you got to bring it into the world, right? So I don't get it right all the time, but I know there's a very big difference between the quality of my experience when I am present, moving through life as if it is a meditation, and when I'm not, right? So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it at the moment.
Right on. Have you ever tried any like the long meditation retreats, or done any Vipassana or any of that stuff?
I haven't. I'd like to. It's one of those things I'm terrified of, but I know I've got to do it.
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, I spent a year there that's in Goenka Vipassana Center, so that was kind of May.
A year without speaking?
No, so basically I would sit one course, so there's like a 10-day course where I would meditate for 10 days, no speaking, except for the first and the last day, so technically it would be like 8 days, no speaking. And then you would like cook and clean the kitchen for 2 more courses after that, and you could talk in the kitchen, but it's pretty minimal.
And you're supposed to be like in a meditative state while you're cooking and cleaning?
You try like to carry it over, but you're meditating 3 hours a day sitting. And then the rest of the time, it's always kind of the same practice. Like for me, meditation is that spot where you kind of close everything out just to focus on that. And so, I get like being in the meditative space or being mindful all the time, right? Because the whole idea of like, say when you're meditating, you're going into this anger or whatever emotion's coming up, is that when you go into life that, you can kind of maintain that state. Like if it's not progressively flowing into your everyday life, then you're probably doing something wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And you see it where it's like so compartmentalized, you see it with almost every tradition, every spiritual tradition, where it's like, oh, well, I'm very peaceful when I meditate, but then when I go in life, it's something else.
That's very interesting.
But it was actually harder, like even the meditation, even though you're sitting there and all this stuff is coming up, it was easier than serving, because a lot of times in the kitchen, you have these people aren't used to that environment and not used to sitting, and then they just project over everyone in the kitchen, and there's always one crazy person, because they haven't never cooked and cleaned. You're cooking and cleaning for like 120 people,
wow.
And so there's always one freak out, and since I was there for so long, I was the manager, so it's always like my problem. And it was, but it was a great experience. And
I've heard many things about Vipassana. One of my friends did it, and he said, I've always thought about this. He said at one point he just started on like day 3 or 4, he just started seeing blood and guts and porn. There's like just sex and fucking gratuitous orgies, and And I mean, I thought that was kind of weird. I was like, you know, on a meditation retreat, surely you should be like seeing a lotus blossom in your mind or whatever. And then someone explained to me that that's what happens on these experiences on long meditation retreats, is that's the process of the mind purifying itself, right? Which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, even like intense spiritual work tends to lead people to get nightmares. Like I can see even how with a lot of the Westerners that first got into meditation, a lot of them like say they're Christian or something, and they start seeing demons when they're going to sleep and stuff. To be like, this is the devil. Like I kind of get that reaction because in the
it's
beginning,
stuff that's coming from within them.
yeah, well, it's all the repressed subconscious stuff. You know, all this stuff in your subconscious that wants to talk to you, you know, isn't given the space to because you're always busy on things external, right? And so when you start going internal, it's like all of a sudden this subconscious stuff is talking to you, and it's like a lot of anxiety, a lot of like tension, a lot of whatever. And so for me, like meditation was mostly unpleasant, like probably like 95% of the time.
Wow.
And but it was the only thing that I ever felt like really worked. It was just deeper, and like for me, like spiritual work is pretty much like shadow work, you could call it almost, where it's just dealing with the darker side and all that other fluffy stuff that feels great.
Yeah,
it's kind of, you know, it's there's moments for that because you're not trying to force anything. So sometimes stuff clears out and it's just like a sunny day inside and you're happy. But for the majority of the thing, if you're really working and then I also kind of realized a lot of it has to do with how conscious you are. I think people that have already done a lot of work and have a very expanded consciousness, when they go inside, there's just a lot of stuff, you know, that they can see. Well, other people, maybe if they're not as aware, like when it was funny because even when I went to Asia and stuff, a lot of times you see these guys, they can sit for 4 hours straight. They don't even know about meditation. If they just told them to sit there with their eyes closed, they could do it.
Yeah.
And it's just because they're just not as expanded and sensitive.
Interesting.
And or stimulated too is a lot of it.
Interesting. Yeah. What comes to mind while you were discussing that is, funny enough, the guy who owns the gym here, Brent, we were staying together for a while, and there was a book that he was reading called Polishing the Mirror by Ram Dass. And that's what it is, right? It's like you're polishing the mind to create a mirror to reality, right? Like polishing is like work, dude. It's not a fun process, right? Like, so I think maybe that's the interesting thing for me, like to understand that meditation and all the spiritual practices, we think it's going to be unicorns and rainbows like this current new age paradigm expects us to believe, but nah, dude, you're wading through the fucking darkness in your psychology. That's why ayahuasca, like that's one of the reasons I know that ayahuasca is a real powerful spiritual tool, is because you don't go there and, you know, have this dreamy experience and talk to angels. I mean, some people do, but generally it's like, no, dude, this is the fucking stuff you need to face. Like, this is the darkness in you, and you need to suck it up.
That's where all the healing is too, right? I mean, if you like went through it and it was all angels and whatever, it's a lot of times stuff hasn't really been healed. You're probably more or less the same, and it was just kind of a cool experience.
Sure.
But it's always when you like, you know, are suffering with something, it's like, oh, you overcame your drug addiction because you know, fought the massive demon in the ayahuasca trip. You're like, okay, that's pretty cool. So I guess we might as well just skip on to ayahuasca then, man, because that's been, from what I've heard on the streets, you've been very influential in the ayahuasca, especially with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu people, and discovering ayahuasca kind of through your earlier work. And so I was just wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit about how you maybe got into ayahuasca and what's that kind of done for you.
Yeah, dude, I started taking ayahuasca, I think the first time was 2011, beginning of 2011. You know, every time someone asks me about ayahuasca, I have to give a different answer because it's just such an expansive thing, and I at least cannot put a label on what it is and what it's doing, but I know it's doing something positive for me. I say to people, ayahuasca is the ultimate adventure because you're going to the other side, right? You're connecting with that realm that all the spiritual teachers have spoken about, and like all the movies and adventures and the hero's journey. It's like it all comes from that place, and we bring it into the world as human beings and then express it, right? But when you do ayahuasca, you get to go behind the curtain, right? Like, so if you ask me what it is and what it does, I can never really give the same answer twice because it's just so expansive. It's so, every time I think I've got that stuff figured out, every time I think I know what it is, man, it shows me you have no idea.
And just, I guess, just to give a little background for people who maybe aren't familiar with ayahuasca, it's basically a root and a vine that they create some sort of mixture with, and it's based, like, it's mainly DMT is the main active ingredient from my understanding.
Well, actually, funny enough, I only found this out last year, but ayahuasca doesn't have DMT in it. It's another leaf called chacruna that has DMT in it.
Oh, okay.
ayahuasca has what's called an MAOI, a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, right? Which is when you take DMT orally, it isn't bioavailable because there's an enzyme in your stomach called MAOI, monoamine oxidase, and that blocks the DMT instantly, just counteracts it. So what ayahuasca has in it, and chacruna has DMT in it, right? So if you just took loads of chacruna, nothing would happen. But when you take ayahuasca and chacruna together, ayahuasca inhibits the MAOI in your stomach and allows the DMT to become orally absorbed. So, and then the fascinating thing about ayahuasca that still blows my mind to this day is there's 18,000 species of plants in the Amazon. And these two, the one with the MAOI and the other one with the DMT, these indigenous people just figured out that these two things go together to create that experience. I mean, the odds of, if you have 18,000 variables, that you could get that combination right, or just through experimentation, is infinitesimally huge. So when they asked the natives, how did you figure this out? How did you figure it out? They say the plants told us, right? And so to me, my understanding, one of the ways ayahuasca can be described is it's this elemental consciousness, plant consciousness, and that people interface with. And so that's, I guess, one way to describe it, right?
Right. I mean, I kind of liked it because, I mean, I have kind of a shaman lineage on my dad's side. And so it kind of rounded out the whole Native American thing for me because I did Vision Quest with that as a teenager. We go like no food, no water in the forest and stuff. And so I always felt a connection to the whole shaman thing. The only thing for me is, you know, I would never poo-poo anything like for me that takes someone that's a material, like just a materialist, into someone that realizes their deeper spiritual realities. And it seems like ayahuasca or LSD or whatever seems to kind of be that bridge for a lot of people, which to me is like phenomenal. Because I mean, I've talked to a number of people till I'm blue in the face about, oh, this and meditation and whatever. And unless they get that taste of there being something more, you know, a deeper spiritual reality that's kind of like semi-proven in their mind from their own experience, there's just not much you can do.
There's not much you can do. The example I always use is Richard Dawkins, right? Who's the author of The Selfish Gene and one of the major champions of evolution and atheism.
Yeah.
I just say to him, like, I just said to the people I discuss this with, if he did a strong ayahuasca trip, like, he'd just know. Right? Like, Richard Dawkins could talk to me and give me all the facts and everything he wants to about the fact that this is just, it's just what we see, what we can experience with the senses. It's a dead universe, you know, mechanistic universe. And he's never going to convince me because I know, because I've been there because of ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And I would, like, that's, like you said, it's the thing that gives people the taste of that experience and helps connect them to the fact that there's more to life than just this, right?
Yeah. My main thing is just to be able to turn that, and this is kind of what I struggle with when I talk to a lot of people who maybe do a lot more ayahuasca or LSD, to turn that into a spiritual practice. Because as soon as you start meditating, like we were talking about, a lot of the demons, you're uncomfortable, the boredom, you know, like it doesn't give you anything outside. It doesn't take a weekend. Now we're talking 2 hours of your life a day meditating, you know, and it's like, to go from there, I'm still trying to figure out how to do this with people, but to take them from, okay, there's something else beyond the physical reality to, you know, a spiritual practice that's consistent that they can really have faith in, you know, is something that I'm still kind of, I guess, trying to sort out with my own stuff with humble stature and this. That's kind of my aim, is like, you know, a lot of these awakened warriors that I've, you know, come in contact with to try to figure out, okay, how can we get this to the next level? You know?
Yeah, and that's a valid point, because I don't think ayahuasca is the cure for everything. I don't. Like, I think I've seen several people fall to the dark side because, sure, it can give you the taste and it can give you a lot of lessons and help you in many ways, but you need to also have the container of discipline and a spiritual practice to keep you grounded, right? I think certain people in my life who do Jiu-Jitsu and ayahuasca, I notice they're the ones who usually do the best with it because they stay grounded through the martial arts, right? They have this disciplined practice, and I mean, if you're just like some guy who's like, hey, I'm just going to drink ayahuasca and become enlightened, I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't think that's going to work. I think you need, as I said, that container. Yeah.
Well, for me too, the other thing is spiritual community. Because I mean, even, you know, when I was younger, I had a major spiritual awakening when I was 14 on that second vision quest I did. And then I was absolutely depressed. Like, I was just failing school. I didn't want to go to school. I was, you know, just everything was like in my life was pretty much hell. And it was only when I found jiu-jitsu at 16 that I basically learned how to fight again. Because before I just wanted to give up. I wanted to give up on life. I wanted to give up on everything, you know? And Jiu-Jitsu kind of basically taught me like, you know, the pleasure and the pain, you know what I mean? Like even with meditating, when it hurts so bad or whatever, there's this sense of like doing what needs to get done. There's a sense of meaning that just overpowers pretty much everything. And, you know, Jiu-Jitsu got me there, and then there was a point where I basically gave up Jiu-Jitsu when I was really like, I mean, I started doing it again now, but, you know, I wanted to be a professional fighter, and there was just this point where it's like everything was violent. It's like I just thought about hurting people, winning tournaments, music, women, everything was just kind of like, you know, getting really intense. Yeah, and, you know, I realized, okay, I need a reset, you know, and I did, which is why I went to that meditation center for a year.
Nice.
You know, but, you know, having that community, because I never really still found a community that I ever really vibed with. You know, even a lot of the Buddhist communities tend to be very ethically centered. It's the Thai community, and they speak Thai, and you're still an outsider. But, you know, and then even like kind of the Western Buddhist communities over here, I found them to be a little bit either too woo-woo or just a little bit too soft. It was just never the whole warrior aspect was just completely lost, in my view. And so that's why I kind of decided to start my own thing and try to build up what I can.
That's cool.
So going from there, this is the next one that kind of caught my eye in your book, Aligned. Was realize it's not about the money, you know, which is kind of where I'm at right now, even though I think there's definitely a balance. Could you say anything about how you kind of came to that realization?
Man, money is such a complex and interesting subject, man. I think about this all the time because it's something almost all of us don't have enough of, and almost all of us want more of, right? And there have been many times in my life that I've struggled with money because I'm just not prepared to compromise my principles. Like, I'm not prepared to go and do something I hate that destroys my soul for money. I'm just not.
Me too.
I'd rather go live in the forest eating berries.
I'd rather be homeless. That's what I was saying to you. Like the first time we met, I'm like, I'd rather be homeless than work some job I don't like. Even though a lot of times, if you have enough meaning, it's just like, you know, I don't know. There's it's not extreme. It doesn't have to be extreme, but there has to be a certain conviction because, like, the world is so materialistic. It'll pull you without that real strong determination on the other side, I think.
Yeah, and there's something to be said. Some materialistic stuff is good, right? There's many amazing things that mankind has created for us to consume and enjoy, right? Life is objectively way better now than it's ever been, because I always think, like, how crappy would it have been to be rich 300, 400 years ago? Like, what could you do? Buy more land, right? You couldn't go skydiving, you couldn't go jet skiing, you couldn't take a trip to Japan, you couldn't do all this cool stuff. Like, you could probably, like, hire more people to entertain you and juggle and stuff and, like, court jesters, but now there's so much cool stuff to do and buy and enjoy and experience, and so there's something to be said for that. I don't want to miss out on all of that, right? I want to enjoy some of the world, and that takes money. And so what I realized is, you know, for a large part of my life, I was focused on trying to get the money, and now I've realized the best way to get money is to focus on giving your gifts back to the world and providing value and having fun while you do that. And then the money usually comes as a consequence, which is hard to do because that usually takes an act of faith, and it takes a lot of thinking and a lot of analysis to figure out where that nexus point is of how you can provide value, what you're good at, what the world needs, all these different things, and then to go and take action and give it, right? And it's not something I've conquered, man. I still struggle with it. There's times in my life where I'm like, I get caught in the trap, especially in a place like LA. Just this week, I was like, fucking, you know, every time you turn the corner here, there's a Tesla, or there's a mansion, or there's a billboard showing you something you don't have.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, fuck, I got to make money, and you get pulled into that, and it's a very powerful thing. But I realized that when I'm under that spell is actually when I'm the least happy, and it's when I'm the least productive as well.
Yeah.
Right? So
and social media, man, really pours gas on that fire too, more than anything else. I think that's why people's unhappiness, if anything, has gone down so much more. Is not even because of the financial; it's really because of this comparison stuff. Like where they're doing studies, right, where it's really like the amount of violence and crime a lot of times has way more to do with like the differential between like how many poor and rich, like how big that gap is, basically kind of determines a lot of the violence and stuff. Because you're looking as if you're a really poor person, right? Like you're looking at all these super wealthy people, and I mean, you know, it's I would understand, you know, being angry at that or whatever, you know, and a lot of times too, if you don't have a lot of spiritual understanding, right, it's like everything is because of everybody outside yourself, right? But once you get a little bit of spiritual understanding, you're like, okay, it might be like 10% me, and then it goes to 20, and it's like eventually gets close to 100.
I know what you mean. Yeah. And full responsibility. I think about that a lot as well. Taking full responsibility, like where you are in life. It might not even be stuff you've done in this lifetime. It might be karmic stuff. Right?
That's what I was about to say. Like, it could be like a lot of the multiple lives thing always made a lot
Sure.
more sense, because I think if you just look at this life, it's really easy to think, oh, there's no justice in the world. Like, everything is
Because you haven't zoomed out far enough, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I was just saying this to a friend yesterday, actually, because he had been in a work relationship with someone who had really abused his trust. And what I said to him is, like, there's one thing that I hold on to that I'm pretty sure is the truth. I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure. And that is that what goes around comes around, you know? And it just makes me feel better.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So moving from there, next chapter over here. Okay, we kind of went over plant medicine. That was number 12, considering plant medicine. And then, so I guess learning to let go. So me and you, I'm really into Dr. David R. Hawkins, and it seems like he inspired you quite a bit too.
Love this book.
And so, letting go, I think that's really the key even with meditation, right? I mean, even the mindfulness, the letting go seems to almost put it in better English than even I think the mindfulness stuff does, where it's about detachment. Because, like, especially in the English language, I feel like people who grew up with English and then try to articulate it, you know, a lot of times versus trying to translate something that's from the past or whatever, it can come across a little bit clearer. And so if you could just tell me maybe, like, with letting go, what was your experience with that, with the Hawkins book, Letting Go, and then how that played out in your life?
Well, the first time I started thinking about that concept of letting go was I think it was maybe even before I read that book. I was watching an interview with Oprah Winfrey, and she was explaining how she wanted to audition, or she had auditioned for the movie The Color Purple. I don't know if you remember that movie from the 80s about I think slavery in the Deep South, which is, you know, obviously that was something that's very close to Oprah's heart. She loved the book. She wanted to be in the movie. And she auditioned for it, and then she found out a couple of days later that some young female model had auditioned for the same part. And Oprah was just like, nah, I'm never going to get this part, right? She was just so frustrated. She was so angry. She was in her own head, like, saying, I'm never going to be in this movie. I'm like, this woman's so much younger and prettier than me, and blah, blah. And Oprah was telling the story. She was at, I think, a retreat or a hotel or something, and she was running around the track, right? Or there was a fitness track or fitness area, and she was running around the track. She was in her head, and she was so angry about this. And then she got to a point where she was like, you know what? Good for that woman. I wish her well. I hope she does exceptionally well with this. She obviously deserves it more than me, and just I'm sending her good energy and blessings. And the second she did that, her assistant came running out with a cordless, one of those old school cordless phones, and saying, hey, it's Steven Spielberg on the phone for you. And it was Steven Spielberg offering her the part. And I realized I've seen that kind of thing in my own life happen a few times. So when I'm holding on to something, like I'm wanting to, you know, like you wanting to go to another level in your life in business, say, right? But you've got an existing business or you had a falling out with a previous business. And I was holding on and angry about it. And it was only when I finally let it go, right? Physically, by saying, okay, I'm out of the business, but also spiritually and mentally by saying, okay, stop being angry about this, just let it go. That's what allows space for the next better thing to enter your life. So that's when I started seeing that kind of pattern emerge in my life. And then I read a couple of books by David R. Hawkins, and when he read, you know, that guy lays it out really, really well. And that's when I realized there's something to it. And man, I will say it is the hardest fucking thing in life to learn to let go. I've been trying very hard for a long time to let go, and it takes a lot of work.
Well, I always believe, like, spirituality is the ultimate challenge. Like, that is the peak. If there is a peak for human existence or whatever, it's within the spiritual realm. I don't think even with the physical, everyone gets old, everyone, you know, stuff comes and goes, you know, and that self-mastery. And that's, I mean, what it's all about for me.
Sure. I really loved as well in his book, he has this, I think he calls it the scale of emotions, where he
level of map of consciousness.
Map of consciousness, yeah, that is. So you're familiar with it, obviously.
Absolutely.
But at the bottom is shame and guilt, right?
Yeah,
and he puts that at 0 to 10, and then it's a logarithmic scale. So there's a huge jump in power.
Yeah.
And at the top is what was it? Peace and joy, or enlightenment is one.
Yeah.
But I rarely have seen that in my own life when I've been feeling that emotion of shame and guilt. Like, my life is just shit. Like, I've got no power, I've got no agency, I've got no excitement. I've got nothing. I'm just literally like weak. I'm physically, spiritually, mentally weak when I'm in that energy of shame and guilt. And then the next one up is anger, right? And he explains how anger is better than shame and guilt because at least it has some energy to it, right? And then the next one up is acceptance, and then etc. etc.
Yeah. Or even anger, then it's like pride, which you see a lot of people here, all in pride, where it's like, oh, look how great I am, right? But that's still a negative field.
Yeah. And I really love this idea of everything is energy, and I think there's something to that. And the more high quality the emotional charge that you carry, or not emotional charge, maybe not the right way to describe it.
The higher the level of consciousness.
The higher level of consciousness, yeah. And if your consciousness is surrounded, like what it's like when you're joyful and happy, like cool stuff happens to you, right? Life is good, right? Like you attract more joyful and happy stuff. When you're angry and you're holding on, right? And when you're resentful, you stay stuck there, and you attract more people at that level to you. Right?
One thing I realized too is like different parts of your life can calibrate at different levels as well. Sometimes your idea, whatever, with like business maybe is really high, and you can be really optimistic, everything's going to work out, right? Really loving and caring to your employees. But then it can also be like your relationship side is like calibrates really low, where it's just like about pride and look how great I am or whatever or something, right?
See, I'd never thought about that. I thought it was just a general, like you calibrate.
There's actually both. So there's like the general calibration of like your whole field, but you could actually calibrate different parts as well, which I thought was
interesting. Yeah, that is interesting.
And the other thing I really liked about him was he has this saying, because I'm not a big fan of like the law of attraction thing, because I think it's kind of ego-centered, where it's like based off of what you are, things attract, and it kind of negates karma. But what he kind of says, what you hold in mind tends to manifest.
Sure.
And especially according to your level of consciousness, so the higher level of consciousness you have, what you hold in mind will have a higher probability of manifesting. And then, you factor in the karmic stuff where, even a lot of the saints had really horrible lives. That's the thing that kind of killed me about the law of attraction, because sometimes you see people, really loving people, and then maybe their field's even very high, but they could have like really horrible lives and a lot of horrible stuff maybe happen to them. And to me it was just like, having that greater expanse just allowed you to not get into like blaming yourself for it, which is what I see a lot with that type of thinking, the law of attraction stuff.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And that was all his, what I learned from him. Man, I studied so much of his stuff. It's
he's great.
Yeah,
he's great.
And so from there, I guess we can move to like the last chapter, which is chapter 20 in your book, which is about love yourself.
Yeah.
And man, that's a rough chapter. Because it's really raw. It seems like even. You kind of put it in at the last minute because you were just going through all this stuff and just really wanted your book to be authentic. But you were, you've gone through a divorce, and that whole self-love thing is really just like, you're kind of even admitting like, okay, I thought I was really good, but then this like blindsided me.
Sure. Yeah. And you realize like you only love yourself because you have X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Right? Or you only give yourself credit because of those things, and like, that's not the way forwards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny enough, the guy who owns this gym, actually, he's off camera, but
hey, how you
doing? he saw me when I was at my lowest, man, and I didn't know I had that darkness and sadness in me. I didn't think there would be anything in my life that could take me to that place, right? And I know now, like looking back, I mean, that was designed to take me to the place that forced me to love myself. It's like, no, you're not getting out of this until you realize you're good enough without your wife, without your health, without any of these things. It's just you. It's like you've got to be happy with who you are, right? I think that's the root of it all. And I can't remember what the author's name was, but he wrote a book called You Can Have It All. I think it's Arnold Patent, if I'm not mistaken. And he said the solution to every spiritual problem is always more self-love and more self-acceptance, which again, just like letting go, it's easy to say that, but it's fucking hard to do, right?
When I hear self-love always, it's like, why should you love yourself would be like the second question, right? So how about that? Like, with self-love, what are you loving yourself for? I mean, I kind of already know the answer, but I'm just kind of curious what you're...
Man, like, I think the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that is just being human is in itself an act of incredible fucking bravery, right? This is a fucking crazy thing that we're all in here. And, okay, let me make it really simple. You have three choices. You can be neutral towards yourself, you can hate yourself, or you can love yourself. And to me, it just makes sense. Like, it's me. I'm the one. At the end of the day, it's just me. Like I can have a wife or a friend or all these people in my life, but at the end of the day, you live alone and you die alone, right? And so that person, that thing that I'm carrying around, that self, I might as well fucking love it, right? Imagine if you had a puppy and you just hated it and treated it like shit, right? I mean, like, what's it gonna do to that puppy? Like, it's not gonna give that relationship any positive elements, right? Whereas if you're giving it love, I mean, I don't see how that could hurt. I can only see how that can help. And so it's easy to love other people and things outside yourself, but man, got to turn that in as well, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you can only really love outside to the extent which you understand yourself. Like, if once you've accepted your own humanity, you can't really, like, I think there's kind of this illusion that you can kind of love other people or you really love other people, but you don't love yourself. In reality, I think it's because other people usually are telling you what you like to hear and somehow validate your reality. So you're like, oh, I love this person, you know? But then, you know, if things don't go right, like for me, like love is always an unconditional thing. If I use the word love, unless it's like a movies or romantic, I mean, I consider that to be more like lust and love. But love, you know, if it's unconditional, basically is by understanding kind of like the divinity in people and the divinity in yourself, that there is a part of us by the nature of consciousness itself that is, how to say, rooted. Like, I mean, I kind of believe like even the ultimate reality, like even when you do ayahuasca or you do a lot of deep meditation or whatever, when the cloud's clear, man, there's nothing but compassion and love.
Yeah.
There's just this expansive feeling. So, you know, instead of like, the thing that I've always had with a lot of even like kind of, in Buddhism they call it metta, which is like usually considered like the spiritual part of love, but it also gets distorted when a lot of people teach it, because it's always like, it becomes something that arises from an intellectual conception of like, I should act a certain way versus I should purify everything, and then naturally this is going to arise, because you can bring it about superficially. Like if I wanted to act very loving with you, like, oh, you're so whatever, you know, hey man, whatever. But there's always a level of inauthenticity versus
so true.
just like, and that's why to me, like once again, man, it's just like it kind of kills me, because I feel like as someone who's been through so much spiritual stuff, it's like I just always feel like everything goes back to the spiritual aspect of like meditating and battling your demons, or kind of going into that, and it's just like that is the exact opposite of pretty much everything that is being taught and that we're, you know, in society having to struggle with.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the only other thing I can kind of think of to kind of address with you, which we kind of talked about once before, is kind of the masculine feminine thing. I thought it'd be kind of a fun topic.
Sure. It's a tough one.
Especially kind of like, you know, as warriors, as, you know, I think like strong men, it's like, what does it mean to be a masculine, strong man in the world today? You know, what's your thoughts?
Well, the thing I'm working with now, I have a mentor in Australia who helps me a lot with understanding relationships, because that's something I haven't been great at, if I'm honest. If I look at my track record, it's like just got divorced, and certain other relationships that I really struggled with. I'm trying to figure it out, like that male-female dynamic. And the funny thing is, Manu, that he's been explaining to me how very often one of the reasons we as men struggle with relationships is we don't actually like recognize the feminine aspect of ourselves, right? Because we all, no matter how tough you are, no matter how much of a man you think you are, like the fact is male and females all have a feminine and masculine polarity, part of themselves, right? Some people express more of the masculine, some people express more of the feminine, but we both have both of those things within us. And like for a lot of my life, it was all about fucking being the man, right? Being the toughest jiu-jitsu guy, or like going out into the world and doing my thing and being on my journey and sleeping with as many girls as you can and fucking fighting and like being a man, right? And I realized like that is cool. A lot of guys don't have enough of that, but there is another part of you, which is that feminine part, which is able to be more receptive and open and intuitive. And I think like you have to have a balance of those two things. Like I've seen it go the other way, where guys get too like feminine and there's no like, you know, strong masculine core, and that's no good either, right? Like you've got to have this kind of balance. So to me, I think I was thinking about this yesterday while I was driving. Like you spoke about getting your love from God, not from a relationship, right? And I think there's something to that, but I also think that one of the reasons people get into relationships is because these different polarities that need to be like expressed, and you know what I mean? Like if if you here at the Jiu-Jitsu mat every day, like trying to strangle guys, or if you're going out into the world trying to make money, or if you're doing all these masculine things, you're naturally going to want to be around someone feminine, right? To like balance that out, right? And I was thinking about what you said, and realizing, you know, you've got to find that feminine aspect somewhere. It's either from someone external or from within yourself. Like you can't exist without it because it just doesn't work. Right?
I guess I would challenge like the concept that masculine can't be balanced in and of itself, and same with feminine. That it had to be counterbalanced. Like in the same way, like, you know, like I'm a man and I have a penis, right? I don't need a vagina because I have a penis, right? It would just be like,
it's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you have to balance the masculine component within yourself, either with your internal feminine or with an external feminine, because of the fact that we live in a dualistic universe, right? Or the simulation, whatever you want to call it. There's light and dark, hot and cold, high, low, etc. In the same way, like a human being is a reflection of that. He's a microcosm of the universe. So he has to have a yin and a yang, a male and a female component, or an expression of it at least, right? You cannot just be the ultimate man, because then you're literally saying no or blocking half of creation. You know what I mean?
Well, I would say like the ultimate man, like I think yin and yang can function purely within the masculine realm, and yin and yang can function purely also in the feminine, as someone who's like incarnated as a man. You know, just kind of a little thing. I'm not trying to.
I'm interested. I'm interested.
So, so like, you know, I think the main thing here is, okay, what's the definition of masculinity that you're using here?
I think the way I put it in the book is the masculine is the active principle in the world, right? So again, I'm probably going to get cancelled for this, but the fact is...
If you saw the rest of my stuff, I just put a whole thing into critical race theory, so we're already probably going to get cancelled, so we can just keep going.
Yeah, like men built the world, right? Like that's a fact. That is an objective fact. Men, if you look at the world, it was built by men. Like physically, it was built by men, but behind the scenes, it was men making the business deals and going out on the ships to conquer and everything.
Patriarchy.
Yeah, the man is the penetrating principle, but I'm not saying men could have done it without women. They need a woman because woman is the nurturing principle, the receptive principle, right? And behind all that male energy, there's female energy, like holding it and guiding it, right? So, to me, I think like if you're a man, if you really want to express your masculinity properly or in a healthy way, you need to be creating something in the world, like out there, building, creating, right? And I feel, and I'm not saying that means you can't nurture, and I'm not saying that means a woman can't create, but generally that seems to me what the polarity is men have that drive and create in the world, and women nurture. It's not a direct correlation, right? I know many creative women, and I know very many nurturing men, but I think that those two things, if you're feeling like you want to be more masculine, create more, right? Go out and make more. If you're feeling like you want to be more feminine, be more nurturing. And if you're feeling like you want to be a complete human being, embody both of them.
I guess for me, like with like the yin aspect, right, would be more like the surrender. Like meditation to me is very, very yin. You're basically surrendering. If there's no pushing, there's no trying to get something, which is why I think like as a warrior, right? I mean, when a lot of guys try to like meditate or do something else, it can be very frustrating because there's nothing to push against.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no like, I mean, I wish, you know, you can kind of imagine, oh, this big demon's I don't have to battle the demon, but in reality, it's very much like just allowing whatever comes up to come up, which can be kind of inverse in that, like, you know, the masculine, like a developed masculine looks more like a stoic than it does what currently would be like an alpha male. Like even a lot of the things about like the world and being like, even like the provider thing is really big. This is where I kind of maybe separate from more the traditional like Christians, where they're a lot more about being this alpha provider or something. Well, for me, it's like from the Hindu system, you have like Shiva and Shakti. Shakti being the feminine principle. So Shakti would be more like this arts, beauty, you know, birth, right? Because women are creating like for their bodies, right? So there's birth and then nurturing the family. That all this is really feminine, and that basically the evolved masculine, which is Shiva, would be more like the spiritual component, or it's more like doing a lot of whether the meditation or trying to detach from the world so you can see things objectively, like logic, reason. All these things are really like what a highly cultivated man looks like. And that I think from my point of view, a lot of this stuff has been inverted in our society, So I think that
I found this interesting. We discussed this on Saturday night. Like, I'd love to hear more about that.
yeah. So I think it's basically been inverted, where what you have is a lot of men taking on feminine characteristics, where it's like, okay, it's a lot about money, or it's a lot about having this object or that object and being in the world or whatever. And I think that women like the status, because there's a certain status to like just sexual attraction from like a very like low level thing, right? Like, but it's lust to me, so it has nothing to do with masculine, feminine. Really, it's kind of always a distortion where it's like I should be able to, you know, like say interactions with women, being able to be with women and their energy, I think can be just recharging. But the actual like wanting to have sex should be something that's just observed and seen as the body versus it's so identified. Really, it's like it feels like a need, right? Most men talk about like sex as a need.
Sure.
But I would say it's actually that's just like because of how distorted our society is. Like especially whether in Buddhist or a lot of the spiritual stuff, they do not talk about sex as a need. Stoicism does not talk about it as a need.
Yeah, and to be fair, a lot of them freak out and start fiddling with kids and stuff, right? Because they repressed that for so long. And I mean, I think it is a need. I think like we are sexual beings, and especially in your youth and stuff, like that is something that has to be expressed in one way or another.
Well, I would say like, you have to kind of like know your lane, like to some degree. Like I think if you try to do like say, it's like, oh, I saw this yogi go up in the mountains and meditate and he reached liberation. I should go do the same, but you're just like, don't have any training. You have no wisdom about anything, right? And this is actually, there's this really funny story. It was like a Burmese monk and he went out in the forest in Burma or whatever, in the mountains. And, he was there for like 20 years and they came back and they were like, oh, did you see anybody else, right, that was out there meditating or got enlightened? And he's like, I saw one guy maybe that had wisdom, but almost everybody that I saw had lost their minds and went crazy.
No shit.
And
that's a true story.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And I think it's kind of like that.
It's to circle back to the beginning of the thing. They didn't have the container, right?
Yeah, well, they weren't at that level. Like to be at the high level where you can really be celibate, like you have to already be getting a lot of information from that higher source. You already have that channel super pure, so you can know what you need to do intuitively. Or because you had a great teacher, right? So a lot of these kids that are monks that sometimes go out in the forest that become these really amazing spiritual teachers, had to spend, their first like up until 16 just studying scriptures and talking to their teacher. And then when they were ready, they went up like
the
teacher.
Have a foundation.
Yeah, like the teacher that we kind of also follow, who's on the Hindu side. His name's Vijayadishananda, and he's pretty cool. And that's basically his story as well. And it was like 20 years in the Himalayas, and I 1000% believe he's not messing around with children or doing any of that.
Yeah.
But it's like a lot of the thing too is just because there's a fake doesn't mean there's not a real.
Yeah, we spoke about that the other night. Yeah. Just and we were speaking about this earlier with Brent. He's talking about that person he met that he felt had some kind of intrinsic spiritual wisdom. And we were skeptical because there's so much bullshit out there. But again, just because there's a fake doesn't mean there isn't a real.
Well, even for myself too, I had to be honest. Like I was a monk for about 15 months, and I couldn't deal with the celibacy. I just couldn't, right? Sure. So either I could have repressed it at that point and gone in there, and that could have like shown up in really messed up ways. I actually really believe that's the reason why I'm pretty much in the situation now is because I believe I did that in my last life. And that's why, like, especially figuring out the sexual stuff. I mean, in your book you talk about like, less than alcohol and quit porn, and especially with the porn stuff, man, that's been like my vice.
Yeah, it's not easy, dude. Yeah, I fall back into it sometimes. Like, so as a man, like, yeah, dude, it's, after my divorce, and I fucking fell back into that again, and I just saw a real decline in all aspects of myself, like my spiritual connection, my mental health, like, because that's the dark, right? That's the fake is porn, right? The real is like connecting sexually with someone that you actually care about, and that so it's definitely something.
Well, the reason why I think it really goes back and leads into celibacy too is pretty much all the spiritual traditions say that. Even Jesus said basically it's better to be celibate if you can, if not have a family, and if you can't have a family, then I guess there wasn't even I don't know, just continue to practice, pray or something, right? And then in Buddhism we have something kind of equivalent, right, where it's if you can't be a monk because you don't have, it's too much or whatever. And a lot of people too, because the thing that kind of sucks about the monastic thing a lot of times, it becomes a career. It's like they don't have a way to support themselves or there's so much shame involved, whether on the Christian side or whatever. If you're a preacher and all of a sudden you're struggling and you feel like you shouldn't be in that position, you can't just say, oh, sorry guys, I know I've been leading you for all this time, but I'm struggling too much, I'm out of here, right?
Yeah.
And so, and especially if you already taken an oath to be celibate, which I think is really, one thing I like about the Buddhist side is there is no oath like that. You basically, try to be celibate, and if you can't, you can always disrobe at any time. But the other thing is like, because that's how they get their food a lot of times, if you don't have any skills because you've been a monk and now you're not, you might just be on the streets. and that happens
Wow.
in a lot of these third world countries, right? So a lot of people don't realize that's behind a lot of this stuff, you know, whether in the Christian or whatever, which is why I think when people really hit that level and they should be doing something else or find another way, they don't. And that's really why it gets messed up, because I definitely still don't think it's the majority of monastics are like that, but it is a big enough number that it's sad. It's really, you know, it's really sad.
Yeah. Heavy.
But you know, and now trying to find even like a partner, right? I mean, that's even in my life now, trying to find a spiritual, someone who also has similar understanding. But I have to get straight about myself and what I want. Like, I really do believe that the man should pretty much be the head of the household and be developed in that way. And
yeah, you definitely get canceled, bro.
Yeah,
Talking
I know.
like that.
Trust me, they've been trying already. But I mean, if it's the truth, man, my always thing is like, I rather, you know, I want to speak as much of the truth because I believe this matters. I mean, it's just all the struggles that I've gone through. You know what I mean? Especially within the sexual department, trying to figure out this masculine, feminine thing, man.
Yeah, it's
like
a tough
we can't
one.
have like, you know, honest decisions because we're afraid of XYZ person's feelings getting hurt. You know,
Sure.
It's just like, this stuff is ancient, man. This is like ancient sutta stuff. I mean, even whether you're Christian, Hindu, whatever, any tradition with all this stuff, they all talk about this the same way that I'm saying.
Yeah, they're not new problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also not new solutions.
Good
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
So, I guess on that note, man, is there anything else you can kind of think
No,
of?
but just really fun to talk to you.
Yeah.
I feel my mind was stretched.
Right on, yeah. Me
Yeah.
too. It's been a lot of fun. So, just to guys finish up, your book is called Aligned, right here. And you also...
You can get it at liberationmentor.com. You can get a free
liberationmentor.com.
copy as well.
Yeah. And Nicholas Gregoriades.
Thanks so much,
Thank
man.
you,
I
brother.
appreciate you, brother.
Yeah. And then Humble Stature also is where I'm at, humblestature.com. I also have a YouTube, which this will obviously be uploaded to. And yeah, thank you for watching and hope you enjoy this. Be happy, peaceful, and liberated.